Today, we are going to look at how the government can play a role in a free market. In a free, unregulated market system, market forces establish the equilibrium prices and the quantity. So, the United States is to a very large extent a free and unregulated market system. While the outcome may be efficient in the sense that we can probably get the most out of the resources we have, okay, with a free and unregulated market. But not everybody is happy about it. So one of the roles of economists is to develop policies, okay, according to economic theories. So we're going to talk about two types of government intervention. So when the government intervenes with a price controls, what that means is the government or policymakers fix the price or set the price at a certain level. So price controls are usually enacted when policymakers believe that the market price is unfair to either buyers or sellers. So there are two types of price control: price ceiling and price floor. Price ceiling is a legal maximum on the price at which a good can be sold. That means no one can legally charge a price that is higher than that. Okay. Price floor is a legal minimum on the price at which a good can be sold. What that means is nobody can legally pay the price that is lower than the price floor. Okay. So the name itself is quite self-explanatory. Ceiling. So that means you cannot go beyond that. It's the highest you can go. Floor, lowest you can go. So let's look at the effects of price ceilings on the market. So we'll come back to this soon. Okay. Let's look at a diagram first. Okay. So this is the initial equilibrium. Okay. So this is the equilibrium, initial equilibrium. In a classroom setting, unless we are otherwise told, the market price is the equilibrium price, the market quantity is the equilibrium quantity. Okay? So in this market, okay, ice cream cone market, for some reason, policymakers think that the price of ice cream cone is too high. The ongoing ice cream cone price is too high. It's not fair. Okay, so some kids would like to have ice creams, they don't get it. Okay, so it's hot. There are some thirsty people out there who cannot afford to have an ice cream cone. So policymakers think that this is unfair, so policymakers decide to impose a price ceiling. So that means nobody can sell an ice cream cone above the price ceiling. Okay. So let's say the policymakers set the price ceiling at $4. Okay. So as you can see, this is doing nothing. And this doesn't make sense either. Okay. So the reason that we have a price ceiling is because we think that it is unfair. The price is too high. So what's the point of setting a price that is even higher than the ongoing market price? Okay? So this kind of price ceiling is what we call not binding. In some books, you may see words like not effective. Okay? But the more proper word should be not binding. So this price ceiling here is not binding. It is set above the equilibrium price. Okay? So it is not binding, it is not doing anything because nobody's gonna go there anyway because people are happy here, okay, at $3. So that's what people are gonna pay, that's what people are gonna charge in the market. Okay? So another case, so price ceiling. Policymakers think the ongoing market price is too high, so $3 is too high. So instead, the policymakers would want to impose a price ceiling at $2. So at $2 here, okay, so the price ceiling is below the ongoing market price or below the equilibrium price. So what you can see here at $2, okay, obviously buyers are happy. So now we have more buyers than ever. 125, that's the quantity demanded, okay? But sellers are not happy. We have fewer sellers than before, okay? So now we have only 75 ice cream cones being sold. So what we can see here is the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied, so we have a shortage. So buyers and some buyers end up chasing ice cream cones. There is not enough ice cream cone in the market, so we have a shortage. Right? So this is a binding price ceiling that can create a shortage. Okay? So now we come back to the previous slide. Okay? The government doesn't always know where the market is. So that means the government sometimes could make a mistake by imposing a price ceiling that is not binding. Okay? So the price ceiling that is not binding is set above the equilibrium price. The price ceiling that is binding is set below the equilibrium price. In this case, it is effective, but it will also lead to a shortage. So let's summarize what we have observed in the diagram. Okay? A binding price ceiling creates a shortage when quantity demanded is greater than quantity supply. So some of the examples of a price ceiling in the recent history could be a gasoline shortage of the 1970s. So in the 1970s, a price ceiling is set on gasoline. So what we see here is long lines in front of gas stations to fill the tanks. Okay? There's simply not enough gasoline in the market, okay? Because a binding price ceiling can create shortages. Okay? There are also some side effects of a price ceiling. So there are long lines. Okay, for example, when there is a price ceiling imposed on gasoline, there are long lines in gas stations. People waited for hours and hours just to get gasoline. And also, in some cases, it may lead to discriminations because when sellers cannot use price to ration the product they have, then they may resort to other types of criteria to decide, who they want to sell to. Okay, so non-price rationing, that's what we call, and that could lead to some kind of discriminations. Okay, so so for example, if someone is waiting in the line, and trying to get gasoline, and the seller may say, well, I don't want to sell to you because I have, my wife has a bunch of relatives and friends who need the gasoline, who want to buy the gasoline. I would just sell it to them. Or sellers may look at the color, the skin color of a buyer and say, I don't want to sell it to you. Okay, and so that is the kind of discrimination we don't want to see, but that could be a side effect when a binding price ceiling is imposed. So I'm going to lead these stories and a few diagrams for analysis. They are for you. They are quite self-explanatory. Okay, so why don't you spend a few minutes on these slides yourself to look at some of the real examples of price ceiling. Okay, a very common examples of price ceiling is rent control. Okay, rent controls are obviously price ceilings because rent controls are imposed when policymakers think that the price is too high, the ongoing rent is too high. So policymakers impose a price ceiling so that nobody can charge rent that is higher than the price ceiling. So rent controls are definitely price ceilings. So we all know that rent controls are imposed because we think that it is fair to help the poor to get a housing that is more affordable. However, in many examples, evidence has pointed to the fact that rent controls may not help the poor, may not help the group of people, the very group of people it is intended to help. Okay? So some economists may even say that the best way to destroy the city is rent control. So let's look at a rent control by using a diagram. Okay. So this is the market of apartment for rent. Okay. So we have price of apartment or rent of apartment on the vertical axis, and then we have the quantity of apartments on the horizontal axis. So this is the demand for apartments for rent, okay, to rent an apartment, and then the supply. So you can see that the supply here is pretty vertical. The supply curve is pretty vertical. As we have learned previously, this is inelastic supply, or in this extreme case, this is actually a perfectly inelastic supply curve. So regardless of the change in the rent, sellers or landlords are not able to change the number of apartments they rent out as much as they can, as much as they want to. Okay, so in this case, you can see that when a binding price ceiling or binding rent control is set below the equilibrium price, okay, we have a shortage. Okay, so the quantity demanded is greater than the quantity supplied. So the shortage, the size of the shortage is quite manageable in this case in the short run. But in the long run, we are likely to observe the situation to worsen. Okay? So you can see that the supplied curve is no longer inelastic or perfectly inelastic. So in the long run, when landlords have time to adjust, okay, so the supply curve become more elastic. Okay? And as a result, we are likely to observe a larger shortage of apartments. Okay? So what happens in the long run is, because landlords are not happy with the price ceiling, okay, so some landlords, they may actually leave the market. Okay? So they don't want to maintain, they don't want to keep an apartment for rent anymore. So they will probably just live in the apartment by themselves, or they just sell them. Okay, so they don't want to be landlords anymore. So that will create a decrease in the quantity supplied. Okay, and also some landlords will just not maintain the apartments anymore. They will just leave the apartment the way it is. So apartments, they are run down. Nobody maintains it. They're damaged. Nobody fixes it. So that leave the landlords, that leave the tenants with fewer livable apartments. Okay, so once again, that's a decrease in quantity supplied. Okay, so and also there are real estate developers who no longer want to build apartments for rent. Okay, so they don't want to build apartments for the average people or the poor people who are qualified for rent controlled. So they may want to just build apartments in rich areas, in areas where wealthy people live or affluent people live who are not eligible for rent control. Okay? So once again, that leaves some areas where poor and average people live with fewer and fewer apartments. So in the long run, we will see the shortage worsen. So if this gets to a certain extent, that means the rent control will fail to protect the people, the very people that it is intended to protect, because the poor ends up with no livable apartment. Okay? So